Welcome back. If it's Tuesday, voters are voting in Colorado. Two of those races could have major implications for the power of progressives in the Democratic Party after establishment Democrats were put on their heels last week in New York's primaries. Democrats are also eyeing Colorado as an opportunity to flip a competitive House seat in the fall. And both parties have candidates fighting it out for a chance to replace the term-limited governor, Jared Polis. Joining me now is NBC News chief data analyst Steve Kornacki, and also with me, Kyle Clark, who's an anchor and political reporter for our Denver affiliate, KUSA. Steve, let's start with you and where things stand in these races. Progressives really hoping to make inroads. In fact, Congresswoman DeGette's district and the Senate primary in particular, what do they need to do to be successful?
Yeah, let's start in that first congressional district there. I think everyone acknowledges that the longtime incumbent here, Diana DeGette, at the very least, is in some serious jeopardy today in this primary. Her main challenger here, coming from the far left, Maylot Quiros, backed by the Democratic Socialists of America, running to the left of DeGette, really stressing Israel, criticisms of attacks on Israel, sort of core to her campaign. That is a model that we just saw some insurgent Democratic candidates successfully use in New York congressional districts last week. We've seen it in some other districts around the country. And just demographically, if you're looking at this first district in Colorado, what you're looking at here basically is Denver. It's not all of Denver, but it's a big part of Denver here. That's the core of the district. And I think demographically, you got a lot of, young, college-educated renters, politically progressive types. That's sort of been the mix that has worked for that style of politics elsewhere in the country. So it's another test for it tonight, but certainly on paper, this is the kind of race that if you're DeGette, first elected back in 1996, you're probably sweating a lot in these final hours heading into the vote tabulation. Where there is more suspense, I think, here, just in terms of whether it's going to be competitive, would be this Senate primary. John Hickenlooper, originally elected to the Senate back in 2020, being challenged by a state legislator here, Julie Gonzalez, again, ideologically running a similar campaign here. But the question is not the city of Denver and some other progressive pockets throughout the state, but whether this expands across the entire state here. Obviously, Colorado, we don't have a lot of sort of statewide primaries to measure a candidate like this against, but you do know back in 2020, Bernie Sanders did win a relatively crowded Democratic presidential primary in Colorado. Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, probably the two most leftward candidates back in that primary, got a combined 55% of the vote. Hickenlooper, by the way, in 2020, he was opposed on the left in his primary bid. He got 59% in that primary, won all but one county here. So this is a sort of a mystery. There's only been one poll. We're not even sure what to make of that poll. So this is the question. Will this one get close tonight?
Yeah. And then we also have Colorado's 8th district. That could be a battleground this fall. What are you watching for tonight?
Yeah, so, take a look here. Democratic matchup. We know the Republican is Gabe Evans. He was elected in a very close race back in 2024, and we know it's going to be closely watched this November because, look, this is a district that Donald Trump carried by 2 points in 2024. It's a district that Joe Biden carried by 5 points back in 2020. It is a swing district. You're looking here at the Democratic primary. Most of the suspense here is whether it's a Rutanel or Shannon Byrd here, a state representative, a former state representative. These are the two leading candidates here. And the backdrop, again, not just a super competitive district, a swing district in November. This is also a district with a very large Hispanic population, a lot of population growth in this part of Colorado. You're talking about Adams County into Weld County, city of Greeley, Colorado, Commerce City. A lot of population growth, a lot of Hispanic population growth. It's a population that Donald Trump made a lot of inroads with in 2024. One of the reasons he was able to narrowly carry this district. So, again, it's going to be close this November, and we'll watch this race particularly to see about those Hispanic inroads the president made in 24, whether they're holding up or receding in 26.
Okay, great, Steve. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. Let's turn now to Kyle Clark. Kyle, you've been covering these races for months, and maybe level set for us. Are Colorado Democrats ready for the same type of progressive push that we saw in New York last week?
Denver Democrats are, Ryan, for sure. I think Colorado is a different story. And the thing you have to remember when you look at Denver versus New York City is New York has closed primaries. Colorado has semi-open primaries in which unaffiliated voters, no party, that is the majority of voters in the state, can participate. So that can have an interesting impact on primaries out here. But certainly 29-year incumbent progressive Democrat Diana DeGette is in real trouble against a 29-year-old Democratic Socialist challenger in Milot Kiros, who appears to have caught DeGette napping, nearly kept her off the ballot at the caucuses. And DeGette has been begging for national resources to come in and save her, and Kiros has all the momentum.
Is it about one specific set of issues for both DeGette and Hickenlooper, or is it more just kind of the mood of the Democratic Party right now? Is it specific to Denver, or specific to Colorado, I should say, or is it more part of this nationwide movement that we're seeing to the left for the Democratic Party?
A lot of it, Ryan, is the same complaint against both DeGette and Hickenlooper, which is they're not delivering for progressive Democrats. But the concern is a lot more acute for DeGette because of the fact that she has been in a safe seat for decades. And a lot of Democrats say she doesn't have a whole lot to show for her time there. Now, as for John Hickenlooper, he was a very popular mayor of Denver, went on to be a pretty popular governor. He has incredibly strong name awareness around the state. Democrats generally like him, even if they don't think he's been a particularly effective senator. They remember his time as governor and his time as mayor. But most importantly, he was not caught napping. He was ready for a challenger. He kept high-profile folks out of the race. So he has a former Democratic Socialist who's challenging him. I would be surprised if that race is close. She hasn't made it a statewide race, has not deployed resources, whereas DeGette found herself napping.
Interesting. That's a great point. And also, you've got a very competitive governor's race there. Two different primaries tonight, both on the Democratic side, one involving the incumbent Senator Michael Bennet, another on the Republican side as well. Just give us an idea of what you're looking for in both of these races.
Certainly. So Colorado's Attorney General Phil Weiser has a couple of things accruing to his benefit tonight. He has been able to sue Donald Trump 65 times, keeping his name in the headlines as a strong anti-Trump voice, saying that Senator Michael Bennet has acquiesced to Trump too much while he's been in the Senate. And the other thing that Weiser has going for him is that he's not a creature of Washington. So even though he's an incumbent, he's benefiting from the anti-incumbent / anti-Washington wave in an interesting way. He was a real long shot underdog to Michael Bennet when this campaign started out. It's believed that this race is going to be neck and neck tonight. And Bennet, of course, would keep his job that he appears to hate in the Senate, that he wants to leave and come be governor. He would keep that job if he loses. If he wins, he would then time his resignation to pick his own replacement in the U.S. Senate. And the thought is that it would most likely be one of three Democratic reps from Colorado, Joe Neguse, Jason Crow, or Brittany Patterson.
And in the Republican race, just quickly, what your thoughts are there?
It's a wild one. I mean, Colorado Republicans have elected one Republican governor in the last 55 years. They have a very mainstream legislator, Barb Kirkmeyer, who's running, but has not caught fire in any way in the primary. There's an ultra-MAGA pastor named Scott Bottoms who has trouble with the Ninth Amendment, often saying some things that he can't back up with facts. And then the front runner is a ministry leader named Victor Marx, who claims to have rescued women and children around the world, kind of like a Rambo meets Billy Graham character. But he doesn't appear to have proof of his claims, and he wouldn't straightforward answer the question about how many people he's killed. He likes to brag about that kind of thing, but wouldn't get into specifics.
Yeah, and I'm sure our viewers have seen you pressing both of these candidates on those exact topics. Kyle, you do great work there in Colorado. So great to get your insight into these important races tonight. Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.